I am grateful to each and every one of you for joining us. And we are recording the session today because we do have a number of people who have registered for the session and they like to receive the recording as an opportunity to go back and listen on their own time. So to everybody who isn't joining us today, we miss you and we look forward to seeing you at the next United Way Next event. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our guest speaker, who is actually rounding out the third session for a three-part series focused on wellness. And for those of you who don't remember, we started out in July with Carrie Strauss, and then we moved in September with our guest speaker, Kate Reed, and we're ending today with our wellness series and Jim Yu. So Jim, you are one of our board members for United Way Next. You also are the co-chair of the Engage and Exchange Work Group, which helps facilitate and put on all these great programs. And you're also just one of our great friends. So we are so thankful to you for being our guest speaker. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carol. And thank you, everyone. Appreciate everybody joining us. This is a topic that I feel very passionate about. And let me share my screen and we can jump right in. By the way, I love this graphic. I stole it from your description on the site and used it as on my title slide. Supporting a loved one with mental illness. Here's the agenda. What I'd like to do is kind of give you a little bit of background for myself, why and what brings me here, my qualifications to speak to you on this topic. We're going to talk about mental illness a little bit in the country, in the US, and based on my family's journey, sharing with you the framework for support that's been so helpful to us and with our family. And let me start with a poll. Let me bring that up. And please let me know if you're able to see this or not. The very first poll I'd like to ask is, what's your relationship with your person that might have a mental illness? And if it's not applicable, that's okay. And if you don't want to respond, that's all right as well.
What if it's all?
We can talk offline.
Just kidding.
Yeah. And as always, this is something that is anonymous, and I want to provide that caveat. We'll be interacting. I'll be asking questions and offering chat. Anyone who's willing to share with everyone else, that's fine. But if you want to just message the hosts, that'll be Caitlin and Carol and myself, and we can share what you put in the chat to us without your associating your name. Let me end the poll and share the results. Caitlin, are you able to see the results?
Yeah, I can see that it's being shared.
Okay, great. So we see that we have lots and lots of people out there. Mental illness affects so many different folks. Let me stop sharing here. I'm going to end this poll. And so this brings me to kind of sharing my personal story. For us, mental illness affects our oldest daughter. We have 3 adult children, and Chelsea is the person that has borderline personality disorder, or what's now also called chronic emotional dysregulation. She's 34 years old, and she lives with us. And for a long time, we couldn't figure out what was going on with her. She was probably, I like to refer to it as she was wandering in the wilderness, and we were right there with her, trying to figure out what was going on. She was misdiagnosed, got improper help, medication, all of these things. And after her second suicide attempt, she was admitted to a local psych ward in Fairfax, and she finally got an accurate diagnosis. As a result of that, she was identified as someone with BPD, and she finally got some help with this accurate diagnosis. When she began her therapy, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, my wife and I received an email out of the blue and invited us to what we thought was a meeting. It turned out that meeting was actually the first in a series of classes called Family Connections. And it kind of changed our lives. It was so helpful to us that I wanted to be and was invited to become an instructor, a leader. And I got certified to teach that class. I've now taught that class 7 classes, helping families across the country virtually with the pandemic. And I then volunteered on several committees and was invited to join the board of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder. And I'm currently the vice chair and will be assuming the chair in 2025. And it's a great organization and it really has changed our lives. But there are still lots and lots of people that are out there and suffering. Here's the second poll. And this poll is let me
I didn't get
relaunch
to
that.
answer.
Sorry?
I wasn't able to answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me end the poll and I'll share the results. So it's hard, but you're in control. Some are okay, feeling great. Stop sharing. There are a lot of people who are suffering. The class that I referenced to you earlier, we have a wait list of almost 3,000 people. There are people that are waiting anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get into a class. These are people that they're in pain, suffering with their person, in this case with BPD, but there are so many people that are out there with other mental illnesses and the families that support them that it's really hard. We have research that shows that when a family member, someone they care about, is involved emotionally in providing support to that person with the mental illness, it really changes the situation for the family member. It improves their level of grief and burden, depression, stress, increases their mastery and their empowerment for themselves. So that you see people who are suffering, but if they can get the right type of help, they can actually reduce their own pain and suffering. Does that make sense? But there's a caveat. There are lots of, well, I won't say there's lots of organizations out there, but what I've learned is having the right framework for getting that kind of help for yourself eventually helps you as a family member, someone who loves someone who has a mental illness, can help them as well because they also can benefit. My daughter Chelsea has said that she's benefited a lot from the support that she's received from my wife Joyce and myself. And she likes to tell people that we now love her in the way that she needs to be loved. That's kind of a big deal. In the US, some of you may be familiar, there are lots of people out there that are experiencing a mental illness, 1 in 5, 20% of the US population. Young people, more and more, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, are experiencing a mental health disorder. The prevalence of the different kinds of mental illnesses out there, when you look at the DSM, which is kind of a standard that lists the various mental disorders out there, they list close to 300 different types of mental illnesses out there. The last time I looked, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 256 or 258 mental health disorders. What I'm here to talk with you about, we're not going to dive into each of those mental health disorders. I'm not an expert on that, on any of those other than our own experience with BPD, chronic emotional dysregulation. But it affects so many different people. BPD in particular, the research is showing 2 to 3% of the population has BPD. So we're talking millions of people, and almost 10 million people. And then when you look at the people that love and support that individual, you're talking millions of people that are in pain and suffering that could get some help, get the right kind, if given the right kind of support, can reduce their grief, can reduce their stress, can empower themselves, types of things. And as you can see, there's a broad range of Americans who are affected by mental health. So the framework for support, this is something that we've learned from ourselves with the National Education Alliance that I belong to. This is the kind of framework that I think helped us, is that number one, you learn as much as you can, you get the latest research that's out there about the mental illness that affects your loved one. And from my perspective, by educating yourself, you're kind of helping to understand and also offer a little bit of grace to your person. So many people out there, they have someone in their lives with a mental illness, and they're like blaming them, and they're like, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do this, do that. And then you get judged. People will judge them and judge you for the support or the parenting skills that you may have. But if you educate yourself and know what's going on, the latest research, you can understand, and from the perspective of giving your person some grace and not thinking they're doing this on purpose, they're manipulating, those kinds of things. That's not the case. The community and support that you get, folks who, when you're finding a community, a group, you're no longer alone. It's like, I hear often from our classes that they don't know who to turn to. They can't talk to their friends. They can't talk to their relatives because of all of the judgments and the stigmas associated with mental health illnesses. But to find that kind of support group and community, it just means the world, so that you can talk to someone who understands what's going on and perhaps has experienced some of the same things that you have. And then the third one, probably for me, is probably one of the biggest, most important aspects of this, is to have skills. If you can learn a lot, the first two, education, you can learn a lot, get the research, you can find groups that you can talk with about this. But without some real skills that helps you to manage your own emotional responses and that of your person with BPD, that's what separates you. I think that's what I've learned in my own experience with Family Connections. The use of skills, the application of skills is a real game changer here. Here's some examples from an education perspective. This one really opened my eyes, is that on the left, you have someone who's basically healthy, normal, if you will. And then on the right, it's a comparison of the brain of someone with BPD. So with a person who has BPD, what this is showing and illustrating is that their amygdala, the part of the brain that controls emotions, the fight or flight. That's really, really kind of overactive, if you will. And then the prefrontal cortex, the logic, the part of the brain that tells you, oh, you shouldn't worry about that. That's not a big deal. That's blue, and that means it is underactive in that. So when someone with BPD sees something that you and I, who we don't have BPD, is showing, oh, that's not something you should worry about. Oh, he's looking at me the wrong way. Someone with emotional dysregulation will say, oh, they're reading so much into that, and they start their amygdala starts going, oh, there's something going on, and they overreact. They have a sensitivity, and so they tend to overreact on things. Well, this shows that there is a physiological aspect to BPD. And so it's not, we often find when someone comes into the class, they will blame their person. And this is basically showing there is a physiological or biological reason for their behavior. Their amygdala is run amok. So they're making these decisions and they're acting out. So someone with BPD is gonna, they can be very angry and emotional and start lashing out at their family members and their loved ones, kind of stuff. Or the opposite is that they will, the flight response is they will withdraw and you don't see them, and they'll hide in their room, kind of a thing. So there are some physiological or biological reasons for the way they behave and the way that they do. Another thing that we have learned in the research with BPD in particular is that there is a sociological aspect of it. There's a mismatch, if you will. So with our family, with Chelsea, is that Chelsea is more introverted. And then we're in a bunch of, she's lives in a family of extroverts. We're very, we're in each other's faces and really loud and laughing hard. And when you have that mismatch, it shows that it the overreaction occurs because there isn't that match, and they see, oh, well, I'm so different, kind of a thing. So there's both a biological and a social aspect that can lead to exacerbating and creating this kind of a mental illness. And so, folks, if you have any questions or any comments, you can either raise your hand or put into the chat to the hosts and the panelists, and we'll be able to respond. So I encourage you to do that. But in identifying and learning as much as you can about your mental illness that affects your person that you're supporting, you're better prepared. And oftentimes you can stop blaming them for things, right? That it's not intentional. When Chelsea was acting out, there were so many different things. Like she would get angry and want to get behind the car, and she would drive off, and she would get tickets, and she would get into accidents and those kinds of things. We thought it was intentional. Stop that. Don't do that. You can choose not to. But when that was occurring, she was in a lot of pain and suffering. And the only way that she can get a release was to go and act out. In this case, it was dangerous. Get behind the wheel of a car and drive off. She could hurt someone else. She could hurt herself, those types of things. But it wasn't intentional. It was because of the pain and the suffering that she was experiencing that she acted out in this way. So instead of blaming her, we could validate and understand what's going on. And I'll talk more about what that means. So see that? Thank you, Carol. Yeah, the emotional part, the brain. Thank you, Carol.
I don't know how to spell amygdala, but I will tell you that once I learned about this.
You went on mute.
Once I learned about this in graduate school, which was in my early 40s, it was a game changer for me and my family, because I suddenly understood why my children acted maybe the way they did, or, got super emotional, or different things were happening. And even myself, when I would hijack and I didn't understand why I was getting so upset or frustrated, my amygdala was just overworked at that moment. But seeing these two images, I can't even imagine how somebody like your daughter could function with all the blue on the screen, and that her amygdala was just running haywire, because that's got to be incredibly overwhelming for her, but also just for the people who are living in the same home.
Thank you, Carol. And the difference between, so this kind of stuff will happen for someone who doesn't have BPD, right? So the amygdala will get active when you're faced with a certain situation. But with someone with BPD, chronic emotional dysregulation, it's always this way. They never know how to kind of come down and regulate themselves. And that's the difference. It's chronic, kind of, they live at that level. So earlier when I asked folks, how are you feeling? On the scale of 1 to 10, people with BPD are constantly at like a 7, 8, or 9. They're very often, their ability to kind of ratchet it down, it's just not there. And the support that she's get, the environment can contribute to that so that she's constantly up there. But if we can get her down through the skills, she can go from an 8, a 9 down to where she can start to express herself in a more accurate way. That's the difference between, because this kind of stuff happens normally for folks, but with a mental illness like chronic emotional dysregulation, it's constantly up there, and it's very difficult for them to come down. So learning as much as you can about the mental disorder is very, very helpful. The next is community support, right? Finding people who can share maybe not all the same experiences, but similar experiences is critical. So I offer up a couple of things. One is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org. And then for borderline personality disorder, that's the organization I'm associated with, NEA BPD, are great resources. NAMI offers support groups all over the country on various different mental illness disorders. So it's likely that you would be able to find a support group. After the pandemic, many of these groups kind of go virtual, but there are still organizations that meet now that things have calmed down. For example, in Texas, in Central Texas, in Austin, there's a group that regularly meets around BPD. Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, they have organizations. So looking up, depending on the mental health illness that your person suffers from, finding a support group would be great. That's the thing we hear often from classes, as we go, it's a 12-week class, by the way. And as we're going through each of the classes, people are just sharing. They can be vulnerable in the class itself because they know they won't be judged. And that's just so critical and so vital, is to be able to share with folks, and they're not judging, but they're supporting you and they understand, and you can help each other. So the value of having a community and support, I can't underestimate that for you, and how important that is. It's likely that you will be able to find an organization depending on the mental health illness that your person suffers from. So here, let me share with you from a skills perspective some of the things that we work on and talk with folks. This one is what you do affects your person, and what your person does affects you. So essentially, this is kind of like we call it kind of reciprocity, right? And the big thing here is that your person can be on the roller coaster, but you can choose not to be on that roller coaster with them. As an example, we talk about that a lot in class. You can choose how you react You can choose and you can contribute to making the situation better, or you can make it worse. And oftentimes what we find is we each have a history with our person and the things that we know it hasn't been working. So in class, we know what you're doing is not working because you're in the class. You're in it because you're desperate for help. And the things that we have done in the past have worsened the situation. And hopefully with the right education and the right community behind you and to learn kind of the skills, you can make the situation better. But this one is a big one because you have a choice. We know that our person, the person with the mental health illness, likely can't change. We can't expect them to change. They are in pain and suffering from their mental illness. But you are the one that can change with the right kind of framework and structure to help support your person. It's not about the nail. Let me share a video with you, one of my favorite videos.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just.
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep?
So it's not about the nail. What do you think that's about?
Well, being heard,
Yes.
trying to, yeah, just being heard, really, trying to explain what's happening so that we can understand and listen.
Understand and listen.
Yeah.
What we often, thank you, Susan. We hear all the time from our person, you don't get me, you don't understand me. And the other is, and many of us are problem solvers and type A personalities, is we try to do for our person and we try to fix them, right? And that's not what our person needs. We're in the midst of crisis or even just living their normal life. We rush to judgment, we rush to judge, or we have certain expectations. And it's not about the name. It's about your wanting to, or your person wanting you to understand them and to quote unquote get them. Carrie?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I mean, that's an interesting analogy with the nail, but it's like, sometimes I think we are people who try to fix things, but understanding that some things can't be fixed in essence. Like you can't, in that video, like kind of to me was like, you can't remove the nail, like it's a part of who they are. And so what they're really trying to tell you is like about the symptoms or things that feel like that can be controlled. And so, yeah, being able to like sympathize and listen is like I don't know, a way that you can't remove the nail. You have to live with it and you have to accept it. And like really what they want is to be understood with like the symptoms that they're having, and for you to be compassionate about areas that you can like impact change, because you can't change like the core of whatever it is that they have that can't be removed.
That's right. And also, if you go back to that scale, when someone is in pain, when they are at that scale, they're like at a 9 or a 10. They're really dysregulated and they're in pain. There's no way they can tell you accurately what's going on. They can only tell you what the pain is. And so if you're trying to have a logical conversation with someone who's at a 9 or a 10, good luck. They're just focused on their pain at the time, and there's nothing else. So one of the things that we teach in Family Connections is first you need to listen and validate what they're feeling. So it's oh wow, you're in pain right now, or you're really frustrated. And that's validation. And that's the first step in understanding and getting your person. When they get down from that really high level of pain, come down, then you might have a conversation about what's really going on. You're peeling back the layers of the onion to get to what's really bothering them. But until then, if they're up here and you're just trying to fix, well, they can't have a logical discussion because their amygdala has taken over, right?
It makes sense. Yeah.
Barbara.
Yeah, I was thinking at it from another perspective. I have a grandnephew who suffers, and actually I just texted his mother because I wanted to know what the diagnosis was to see if it was this one, and it's not, it's different. But you know, we keep thinking, well, it's just find the right doctor, find the right medication to provide relief. And you know, given that we live in Maine and we have very few resources here, and I know you're in the nation's capital in an area where there's lots of resources, it's just a good reminder that it's not all about that. It's just trying to figure out how to interact, like you said, with people. So thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Barbara, because, you know, even with the right therapy and medication, we could still make the situation worse as family members. And the support that we provide could be negative. It could actually make things worse. The studies and the research that we have says that if we're involved emotionally and our person knows that, their recovery, their improvement is significantly higher when they know that someone is on their side in their family. Did I see another chat go up? Figuring out how to cope is so important. Yes, Carol. I'm going to talk about that in terms of the what we do in practicing self-care. Okay, here's a scenario I'd like to pose to you all, and then I'm going to bring up a poll to see how you would handle it. So it's Thanksgiving. Your family is getting ready to go to the annual dinner at grandma's house. There'll be a lot of people attending, probably a dozen or more. You're all on the way out the door. Drive over. Your person just came down. They seem tired and anxious. They hadn't slept in a while. They said they don't want to go. What do you do? Let me bring up the poll. This will be the last poll. Okay, thank you, folks. And that, share the results, and talk a little bit more. I'm going to go back a little bit. In that, the first few here first four are typically things that have happened, right? You are questioning, you're challenging, you are extorting, you're strong arming, or you are getting on their case, or you're blaming what they're doing, their behavior. Oh, you're on your phone all the time. It's no wonder you're tired. Types of things, versus that fifth answer is trying to get at a little bit of curiosity and also perhaps validating how they're feeling. In this case, the emotions is very important, and we teach people in class, family connections, about identifying, and you're kind of like detectives. What's the emotion that my person is going through, experiencing right at that time? We also try to teach you to be aware of your own emotions, because that's really critical. It's that awareness. And to be able to show your person that you're trying to understand what's going on with them. Now, let me see what folks are put into the chat for those who said, see what that is. Hold on. Okay, you've experienced that. Listen to them first. Great. Encourage them to take a break. Yep. Good. Nice. Thank you, Carol. Oh, hi, Emily. Thank you. Yeah, Emily says, I would just say no problem if they're old enough, well enough to stay on their own, and then ask how they're doing later. So it's not about grandma's house, but about them and how they're feeling. Very good. Very good, Emily. Thank you. One of the things that we talk about is it more important, the relationship or being right? Right? A lot of us it's all about, we're constantly, I want to be right. And what gets sacrificed is the relationship with my person. So Emily's response is an example of putting the priority on the relationship. Caitlin says, offer accommodation. Can they go to grandma's house for a shorter amount of time and rest in another room, or only participate in dinner for a half an hour? Great. Thank you, Caitlin. That's something that we've arrived at with our own daughter, is pending that kind of negotiation to acknowledge that if you need a break, if you need to step away. We just did that at Thanksgiving. We ensured that at my sister-in-law's house, that she could have a room to herself if she needed a break to stay away. So that's a good response. Thank you, Caitlin. That's a validating response. And also, you're showing collaborative problem solving, which is really, really important here, versus you must do this and do it my way kind of stuff. Thank you, folks. Barbara?
I'm just curious, Jim, on that issue of, yes, if they're an adult child, then they could stay alone. But is it a good idea? I mean, when is it a good idea? Or I guess you get to know this over time, to just say, fine, and leave them alone. That's the question. It's about leaving folks alone.
I think it's so, and I think what I'll read from your question also is, what state are they in? If at the time that they're in a state where, for example, there could be self-harm involved, then that takes precedent over everything else. If they're like at a 9 or a 10, they're explosively dysregulated, I wouldn't leave them alone. Absolutely. That's one of the things we talk about. Everything goes out the window if there's any kind of peril or threat involved. But if they're tired and and it's not an isolated event, it's never that particular thing, it's a buildup. What I mean by that is you can see the signals over a period of time right before the event itself that allows you to, if you have the self-awareness and the awareness of your person, to be able to make certain judgments that lead up to that point. It's never just right there, you make a decision. It's, oh, they haven't been sleeping for a couple of days, or they haven't eaten for a couple of days. All of that factors into those decisions about leaving someone at home or not.
Thank you.
Sure. So here's some additional examples of some of the skills that we teach. I talked about the reciprocity, what you do affects your person, and what your person does affects you. That basically is the idea of it's really on you as the person. We can't expect our person who is suffering through the mental illness to make changes. So it's on you. The judgment aspect is really, really important here. And that goes to what I talked about with the community and the support. We judge all the time. And judgment can be helpful. There are benefits to that. It saves time. But when it becomes kind of toxic, we make certain assumptions, if you will, and judgments. And we need to cut that out, because judgment can really add a lot of burden and a lot of problems in these kind of relationships, or any kind of relationships. The mindfulness, the awareness, to be in the moment, to recognize the relationship and to be mindful of the relationship. The mindfulness for yourself, to take care of yourself, are all kind of, to be in the moment and to remember that, are important skills to have. We talked earlier, I think a couple of folks, the acceptance piece is that recognizing that you can't change everything or this particular situation at that time. It doesn't mean that it won't change later on, but for now, you may need to accept that that's not something that you can do. By the way, I'm giving you a real quick run through of skills that it's a 12-week class that I teach here, and we spend a significant amount of time on these various different areas and different skills. One of the most important ones is validation. To be able to validate our person. And oh, by the way, all of these skills, particularly like validation, are skills that work for everybody. Right? Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be understood. It's particularly important for folks like folks who have kind of emotional dysregulation, to validate and understand them, to see, oh, Barbara, you're really frustrated right now. And then just shut up and let your person tell you that what you determined was how they're feeling is right or wrong. Too often, again, going back to the type A personality, we want to kind of rush in and we can't stand the silence. And that's one of the things that I try to teach in class is test out the validation. You know, Carrie, you seem really upset right now, and then just shut up and let Carrie tell you whether you're right or not. Kind of stuff. Oftentimes, it's like we just got to keep talking and keep talking, versus, okay, this is what I think you're feeling right now. Tell me if I'm right or wrong, kind of thing. Focus on the facts is also a reference to things like the judgment kinds of things, or our interpretation of things that are going on. One of the things we kind of focus on and try to teach is observe and just describe the facts that are going on without all of these interpretations. And the very last thing we teach to folks is collaborative problem solving. The reason that's last, and a lot of people sign up for these classes and they want to get right to that. And I didn't mention this, but this is important, is that these kind of classes is not about changing our person. It's about changing ourselves. We can't change our person. They need to get professional help for whatever mental illness that they're going through, whether it's medication or therapy and those kinds of things. We can change ourselves. But to do collaborative problem solving means that we have to establish a level of trust and credibility with our person to show that we're really trying, that we're trying to understand them, or we're trying to be more aware and mindful of what's going on. Otherwise, that it's like you're trying to fix me, and that's never going to work. But if you show to your person that you're really trying to understand and get them, you're building this trust and credibility that maybe they will listen to you, and maybe they will tell you what's really bothering and what's going on. Without that credibility and trust, none of this works. That's why collaborative problem solving is the very last thing that we work on with in class. You've just got to develop that trust and credibility. Questions about these kind of skills? Here's a few others that Susan, were you going to say something? I see you took yourself off mute.
I really understand how learning those skills can be very helpful. But it totally has to be a two-way street for it to work. And I just have been told a few times that somebody actually understanding that they have BPD is really difficult for the person who experiences BPD.
Mhm.
And so somebody like me saying, well, you have BPD, let's talk about this, that makes zero headway.
Won't work.
Yeah, right.
Won't work.
So I'm sure the skills are still important. And I mean, I'm sure I could learn a lot from the skills. But the collaborative part, just speak to me about the collaboration.
So and Susan, what you're saying is also probably right up there. First part of the class, people will say, how can I, and this is a huge question for folks, how can I convince my person to go get help? Or how can I convince my person that they have BPD? And I say, good luck, because that's not going to happen. What can happen is that you can make the situation not worse by validating and not judging your person. And that as you build up some credibility where they're not up here all the time, but maybe they're a little bit lower, let's say a 4 or a 5, where you can actually have kind of the logical discussions without them getting them dysregulated, then you might have a chance at having those conversations. But if they're 7 or 8 and you broach that subject, again, their amygdala has already taken over. So they're going to say, oh, well, what's she trying to do? She's trying to fix me. You're not going to get there. But if you can, in the relationship, kind of build that trust where they're not always on guard and fighting or running away kind of stuff or defensive, then eventually with that trust, you can say, have that conversation. Well, I've tried everything else. This is the latest thing that I want to try because I love you. And I want to do what to support you type of thing. And then you might have a chance at that kind of conversation. Otherwise, it ain't going to work because you've already tried that. Because for people who do that with their person, oh, you have BPD and you should do this.
Right.
Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't trust you. You don't understand me. You don't get me.
Yeah.
But if they see you've been listening and you reflect back and validate to them, you're pretty angry right now. Yeah, I am. Because it's this, and then you peel back the layers of the onion, and it turns out it wasn't you at all. It was that they almost got into a car accident. And you can see that, and they're at a 8. And then through your validation, they might come down to a 7. And you might be satisfied with that 7. And the next time you're watching a TV program and they're saying, oh, that's terrible, kind of, wow, that really struck you hard. Oh, well, she's really trying to get me, kind of stuff. And then eventually, and you never broach that subject when they're at an 8 or a 9, you got to wait that they're accurately expressing themselves, and then you might have a chance. That's my response often to people that, well, they're not getting diagnosed, or they won't admit that well, we can't change them. That's that other part of the equation.
Right.
We can help you to not make things worse.
Right.
That's the family support.
Yeah.
This quote about anger, I think, is particularly very, very relevant to certain people, because these are the folks who have had such a burden over a history of time. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Right? It's a why me kind of stuff. Oh, why is it always me that has to change? Or why is, and then siblings. This is a big one with siblings. Why do you always favor so-and-so kind of stuff? They get everything they want, right? Well, they have a mental illness. They didn't choose to have that, right? What can you do to improve that situation if you understand kind of stuff? This is a very powerful one for people who feel just so put upon by their person. It's just hard. But you think back to that reciprocity and that model where what I do affects them and what they do affects me, but they can't change. We can't expect them to change. This is part of that. Another one I found helpful for folks is the stop. Stop responding automatically. Take a step back, observe, look at the facts, and proceed mindfully. Be present. Use skills, types of things. Take a breath. Don't act out in the way that you have done in the past, because that kind of pervasive history is what's led to this point where you're not trusted. Every time you speak, they're defensive or they lash out in anger, kinds of things. But this is a helpful kind of little reminder to folks. Now, here's the thing. Put on your oxygen mask first. For those of you who've traveled on planes and stuff, this is a one you hear it all the time. Before you help someone else, you got to help yourself, right? So this is, how do you practice self-care? Because if you are dysregulated, if you yourself on that scale of emotion, if you're like a 7, 8, or a 9, you can't possibly help someone else. You remember that amygdala? If you haven't slept, if you haven't eaten, if you haven't exercised, if you haven't managed your own stress, there isn't any wonder, you shouldn't be surprised that how you react to your person when they come at you is going to be explosive, right? So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, how do you practice self-care? Or just raise your hand. For me, I got to exercise. I exercise 6 days a week. Weightlifting, aerobics kinds of stuff. I also cook on the weekends when I have time. These are the things that I kind of do to practice self-care. And this is very important, how we take care of ourselves. Go outside, exercise. You have to be outside. Emily, that's proven, is being outside is really helpful. Going for a walk. Thank you, Carrie. We have to take care of ourselves. One of the things we talk about is there are contributing factors to our person. It's the same with us, to be self-aware that if we are not in tip-top condition, if we're lacking the basic kind of fundamentals of sleep, food, exercise, those types of things, it will dramatically affect how we support our person. And this is the kind of thing that we talk about with during class, is that we have to take care of ourselves first. I know we don't have a lot of time left. Thank you, Caitlin, my timekeeper and my partner. Okay, so I'm just going to go straight to opening it up. But as you're doing that, and please fill out the webinar survey here. And you'll get, after the webinar ends, you will also get a survey. So we'd greatly appreciate if you would respond to that. But in the time remaining, be happy to answer any questions you all might have. Thank you, Nancy. That's good.
Hi, Jim. This is Emily Watkins. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This is very helpful. And I was off video, but I had lots of nodding along and appreciate you sharing.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you, Nancy Pinto. Good to see you or hear from you.
And somehow, can you hear me, Jim?
I can.
Well, I don't know what happened, but I've lost the Zoom connection from my computer screen. But we talked about this a bit at the gathering, and I've been so intrigued by you and your family's journey, and particularly your openness to being willing to share with all of us. And these are the kinds of things that are so important. So I thank you so much. I'm a huge believer that these are our very best learning opportunities when somebody like you is willing to really talk about their experience and know that there's so much available. Not only is there a lot of information available, but there's also a lot of support. So I really appreciate it. I had never heard of the organization you talked about, NEABPD, and I can't wait to dig into it a bit.
Happy to help if you'd like.
Thank you.
Sure. And thank you for your kind remarks, Susan.
Love you, Jim. You know
Love
that.
you back. I know. Love you back, and say hi to Ben.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo thanks. It's just really helpful. And I guess it means so much more from having someone with personal experience, but I know it's not easy to do that. So thank you for today, but also thank you for your efforts to teach this ongoing and be with it. My question is, so are there similar types of support and education groups for different disorders?
There are. I'm not familiar with all of them. NAMI is a good source because they offer so much. I think they're a good starting point. And the link is in the presentation, and Caitlin has that PDF. And but they're a good starting point. But for each, and there's so many of these, there are 250 some odd disorders listed through the DSM that you likely will be able to find. But I think the big differentiator for me is that finding a place that also offers skills. There are plenty of places that like have support groups, and I'm not knocking them. I think they're really helpful, but if all you're doing is commiserating and not moving forward in terms of skills for yourself and skills for your person, I think that's not as helpful as finding an organization that also offers a class with skills. That's the big thing for me. And that's why I offered this up as a framework, is education. It is group and community support. But for me, the biggest differentiator is skills.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
There was a comment in the chat by Emily that said that their United Way has a youth mental initiative called Everyday Strong, and that they also partner with NAMI, the NAMI chapter in their county. And I know when I was working at the United Way, there was a NAMI chapter in my county as well. So I think NAMI is a wonderful resource for mental illness. And, you know, Barbara, I'd encourage you for your family member to look at the local United Ways, if and maybe that's right in your state, but they probably have resources that they could refer as well. That some, you know, I mean, we should all know that as United Way professionals, but this is at the heart and the core of what we've done for so many years, is we provide the funding to support the programs that help the people. And today's session is more about us receiving the support that we need when we're in this moment. So I just want to mention for Jim, how grateful I am to hear you speak and share your personal story. And throughout this, I was getting emotional thinking about the times in my life when my family was in crisis, from my own immediate parents to my children, and my youngest and oldest son both had some issues that we had to work through. And as a parent, we want to do everything we can to help our children, and it's so difficult, or our other loved ones, our grandchildren. And so just hearing you speak and sharing about your daughter just took a lot of courage. And so thanks for that. And your desire to share openly about your experience as an educator, and really helping us find the right resources, because that's always what helped us. When we were in a moment of turmoil and our amygdalas were hijacked, it was getting the resources and getting educated to help move forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that.
Any other questions for today? I know we're running a little over, but we wanted to make sure we had time as we were wrapping things up. All right. Well, Jim, again, we want to say thanks to you for being an excellent guest speaker and presenter. It was very informative. To those who didn't join but will listen to this later, we had a great session today, and I hope that you, if you do have any questions and you're interested in talking with Jim directly, that Caitlin can include that in the email that goes out, so that there is contact information for him as a guest speaker, and the resources related to NAMI and the other links that were shared in the chat. And if there's anybody feels they want to stay on for a minute, Caitlin and I are committed to another minute or two, so feel free. Otherwise, thank you for being a part of today's session, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully next Tuesday, the 12th, for coffee or Cocoa with Carols, which will be hosted by myself and Carol Berger, for a fun social gathering that will really hopefully lighten your mood and bring joy in your life. So we'll hope to see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.